The ornaments lay scattered across the snow-covered lawn, shimmering under the pale moonlight like fallen stars, each one a tiny, glittering reminder of what Christmas was supposed to be. I could still taste the bitterness of the eggnog, laced not with cheer, but with the acrid sting of betrayal. The words hung in the icy air, each syllable a shard of glass piercing my heart, a cruel symphony conducted by the man who was supposed to be my father. He had shattered my world with a single sentence, and as I stood there, the wind biting at my exposed skin, I knew that the old Stephanie was gone, replaced by someone forged in the fires of injustice. If you truly cherish your family and believe a daughter deserves unwavering love from her father, then subscribe now and join our community where family always comes first. The week leading up to Christmas had been a whirlwind of forced smiles and strained conversations, a desperate attempt to maintain the facade of normalcy that had always defined our family gatherings. We always did Christmas big, a tradition meticulously orchestrated by my mother, a woman whose life revolved around creating picture-perfect memories. My brother, Mark, always brought his new girlfriend, usually someone impossibly polished and eager to impress. My sister Emily, with her 2 rambunctious kids in tow, added a layer of chaotic energy that both annoyed and amused my father. And then there was me, Stephanie, the black sheep of the family, the artist, the one who dared to dream beyond the confines of their carefully constructed suburban world. I owned a small pottery studio, a venture my father openly mocked as a hobby rather than a real career. He never understood my passion, my need to create, to mold something beautiful out of the formless clay. He always pushed me to pursue something more stable, something that would earn his respect, something like accounting or law. The conversation flowed, albeit somewhat awkwardly, around the usual topics: Mark's promising career in finance, Emily's struggles with motherhood, and my father's latest business triumphs. I mostly stayed silent, content to observe the scene, feeling like an outsider looking in. After dinner, as we gathered around the fireplace, my father cleared his throat, a signal that he had something important to say. He stood up, his face flushed, and began to speak, his words initially innocuous, a rambling toast to family and tradition. But then his tone shifted, his voice hardening as he turned his gaze towards me. He began to criticize my life choices, my career, my lack of ambition, his words laced with a venom I had never heard before. He accused me of being a disappointment, a burden on the family, a failure to live up to his expectations. I sat there, stunned, as his tirade escalated, each word a blow to my already fragile self-esteem. My mother tried to intervene, to calm him down, but he brushed her aside, his eyes fixed on me with an almost manic intensity. And then came the hammer blow, the sentence that shattered everything. He announced, in front of my entire family, that he was disowning me. He declared that he no longer considered me his daughter, that I was a disgrace to his name, that he wanted nothing more to do with me. The room fell silent, the only sound the crackling of the fire in the hearth. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, my vision blurring as tears welled up in my eyes. I looked at my mother, her face etched with horror, at my siblings, their expressions a mixture of shock and discomfort. But no one spoke, no one came to my defense. My father stood there, his chest heaving, his face flushed with anger, his eyes filled with a cold, hard disdain. I rose from my chair, my legs trembling, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't speak, couldn't find the words to express the pain and betrayal that I felt. I simply turned and walked out of the house, leaving behind my family, my past, and everything I had ever known. As I stepped out into the cold night air, the weight of his rejection pressing down on me, I made a silent vow. He may have disowned me, but I would disown him right back. I blocked his number, deleted his emails, and resolved to never look back. The person I trusted most was one of them. The cold seeped into my bones as I walked away, each step crunching on the snow-covered ground, the sound mocking the silence that had fallen between me and my family. I had nowhere to go. My purse was still inside, with my wallet and keys, just the clothes on my back and the burning humiliation of my father's words. I walked for what felt like hours, the cityscape blurring around me. Finally, I found a 24-hour coffee shop, the neon sign a beacon in the darkness. I sat in a corner booth, nursing a watery coffee, trying to formulate a plan. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, my father's face swam into view, contorted with anger and disgust. The phrase, "I disown you," echoed in my head, a relentless loop of pain. I spent the night in that coffee shop, watching the city slowly come to life, the early morning light painting the sky in shades of gray and pink. As the sun rose, I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I needed to find a place to go, a way to survive. I called Mark. He was always the most reasonable one, the peacemaker. I told him what happened, my voice trembling as I recounted my father's cruel words. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then he sighed. He said he was sorry, that he couldn't believe what our father had done, but he also said he didn't want to get involved. He said it was a family matter, that I needed to work it out with our father, that he couldn't take sides. His words were like a punch to the gut. I hung up, tears streaming down my face. Even my own brother wouldn't stand up for me. So much for family. I swallowed the lump in my throat and started to think about how to get back on my feet. I had very little savings, my pottery studio barely breaking even. I had poured everything I had into it, a testament to my passion, but now it felt like a foolish dream. I managed to scrape together enough money for a cheap motel room on the outskirts of town. The room was small and dingy, the air thick with the smell of stale cigarettes and desperation. I spent the next few days alternating between applying for jobs online and staring at the ceiling, the weight of my situation crushing me. I tried calling my mother, but my calls went straight to voicemail. I knew she was probably screening my calls, afraid of my father's wrath. I felt utterly alone, adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Every night I dreamed of my father, his face morphing into a grotesque mask of disapproval. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the taste of bitterness coating my tongue. The silence from my family was deafening. No calls, no texts, no emails. It was as if I had ceased to exist. I started to question everything. Was I really the failure my father claimed I was? Had I wasted my life pursuing a foolish dream? Doubts gnawed at me, eroding my confidence, chipping away at my self-worth. I forced myself to get up every morning, to shower, to eat, to go through the motions of living. But inside, I felt like I was slowly dying. The job search was proving fruitless. My lack of experience in anything other than pottery was a major disadvantage. Employers were polite but dismissive, their eyes glazing over when I mentioned my studio. Rejection after rejection piled up, each one reinforcing my father's cruel assessment of my worth. One afternoon, I drove by my parents' house. I told myself I just wanted to see if my mother was okay, but deep down, I knew I was hoping for a sign, a glimmer of hope that things could be salvaged. The house was the same as always, the manicured lawn, the pristine white paint, the picture-perfect facade of suburban bliss. I sat in my car across the street, watching the house, waiting for someone to emerge. After an hour, my father came out, dressed in a suit, his face grim. He got into his car and drove away. I wanted to run after him, to confront him, to demand an explanation, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed by fear, by the memory of his anger, by the weight of his rejection. I watched until his car disappeared from sight, and then I drove away, tears blurring my vision. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living like this, wallowing in self-pity, waiting for someone to rescue me. I needed to take control of my life, to prove my father wrong, to show him that I was not a failure. The old Stephanie was gone, shattered into pieces by his cruelty. But from those pieces, a new Stephanie would emerge, stronger, more resilient, and fueled by a burning desire for retribution. They thought they were untouchable. That was their mistake. The following weeks bled together into a monochrome landscape of despair. The motel room became my world, a cramped, depressing cage. I rationed the little money I had left, eating instant noodles and cheap bread, my body slowly beginning to reflect the deprivation I felt inside. Sleep offered no escape, only a relentless replay of the Christmas debacle, each scene more vivid and cruel than the last. I stopped looking for jobs, stopped showering regularly, stopped caring about anything at all. I was a ghost, haunting the edges of my own life. One evening, as the sky outside bled into a bruised purple, I found myself staring at a bottle of pills in the bathroom cabinet. I don't even remember buying them, but there they were, a silent invitation to oblivion. The thought flickered through my mind, a dark and tempting whisper. End it all. Just let the pain stop. Let the darkness consume me. No more rejection, no more disappointment, no more feeling like a failure. I held the bottle in my hand, the plastic cold against my skin. I opened the cap, the metallic scent filling my nostrils. I tilted the bottle, the pills rattling like a death rattle. I closed my eyes, ready to surrender. But then a flicker of defiance ignited within me, a tiny spark in the overwhelming darkness. I thought of my father, his smug face, his dismissive words, and a new thought arose. He doesn't get to win. He doesn't get to drive me to this point. He doesn't get to define my worth. A surge of anger coursed through me, stronger than the despair, hotter than the shame. My vision blurred, and I hurled the bottle against the wall, the pills scattering across the grimy floor like tiny white tombstones. I sank to my knees, sobbing. But this time, the tears were different. They were not tears of surrender, but tears of rage, of defiance, of a nascent determination. I would not let him break me. I would not let him win. I would make him regret the day he ever uttered those words. I stood up, my legs shaking, my body trembling, but my resolve hardened. The old Stephanie was gone, but something new was being born, something cold, something calculating, something driven by a singular purpose, revenge. I would not let him see me suffer. I would plot. I would strategize. I would take everything he held dear. The first step was survival. I needed to get out of that motel room, to find a way to support myself. I couldn't rely on my family. They had made that abundantly clear. I had to do this on my own. I swallowed my pride and called an old friend from high school, Sarah. We hadn't spoken in years, but I remembered she worked at a local coffee shop. I explained my situation, omitting the details of the family drama, just saying that I needed a job, any job. Sarah, bless her heart, didn't hesitate. She said she could get me a job as a barista, that they were always looking for extra help. The pay was minimum wage, but it was enough to get me started. I moved out of the motel and into a small shared apartment with Sarah and another girl from the coffee shop. It wasn't much, but it was clean and safe, and it was a step up from the squalor I had been living in. The work was hard, the hours long, and the customers often rude, but I was grateful for the distraction. Every day, as I poured coffee and wiped tables, I thought about my father, about his betrayal, about the pain he had inflicted on me. And with each passing day, my resolve grew stronger, my plan more defined. I started keeping a journal, a secret repository for my thoughts, my observations, my strategies. I wrote down everything I knew about my father, his business dealings, his personal life, his weaknesses. I needed information, ammunition. He thought he was untouchable, that he could get away with anything. But I knew better. Everyone has secrets. Everyone has vulnerabilities. It was just a matter of finding them. I spent my free time researching my father's company, poring over financial reports, news articles, and social media posts. I learned about his latest ventures, his business partners, his philanthropic activities. I also started paying attention to his personal life, discreetly monitoring his social media accounts, observing his habits, his routines. I discovered that he was a creature of habit, predictable and complacent. He went to the same golf club every Saturday, had lunch at the same restaurant every Wednesday, attended the same charity gala every year. He thought he was being careful, but he was leaving a trail, a breadcrumb path for me to follow. One evening, while scrolling through his company website, I stumbled upon a news article about a lawsuit filed against his company by a former employee. The employee alleged that he had been wrongfully terminated after reporting safety violations at one of the company's factories. The lawsuit had been settled out of court, the details sealed, but the article hinted at a pattern of negligence and disregard for employee safety. This was it. This was the crack in his armor. This was the leverage I needed. I started digging deeper, searching for more information about the lawsuit, about the employee, about the safety violations. I spent hours online, scouring court records, social media profiles, and online forums. I felt like a detective, piecing together fragments of information, slowly uncovering the truth. It was tedious, time-consuming, but I was driven by a singular focus, a burning desire to expose my father for who he really was. He may have thought he had silenced his victims, but I would give them a voice. I would make him pay for his sins. The more I dug, the more I found. The lawsuit was just the tip of the iceberg. There were other complaints, other allegations, other instances of negligence and misconduct. I discovered a pattern of cutting corners, of prioritizing profits over safety, of silencing anyone who dared to speak out. My father had built his empire on lies and deceit, on the backs of exploited workers and unsuspecting investors. He thought he was untouchable, that he could get away with anything because he was rich and powerful. But he was wrong. I had the truth, and I was going to use it to bring him down. I knew this was going to be risky, that I could face legal repercussions, even physical danger. But I didn't care. I was past the point of fear. I was fueled by a righteous anger, a burning desire to expose the truth, to seek justice for those who had been wronged. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about doing what was right. It was about holding my father accountable for his actions. It was about reclaiming my own life, my own dignity, my own worth. I was no longer the broken, defeated woman he had disowned. I was a warrior, armed with the truth, ready to fight for what I believed in. The plan had begun, and nothing would stop me. I started to record everything.
I started compiling all the evidence I had gathered, organizing it into a chronological narrative, highlighting the most egregious violations and the most compelling stories of victims. I scanned documents, transcribed recordings, and created a detailed timeline of my father's misconduct. I knew that my father's lawyers would come after me with everything they had, so I needed to make sure that everything I presented was accurate, verifiable, and legally defensible. I spent weeks fact-checking every detail, cross-referencing sources, and consulting with legal experts to ensure that my information was airtight. It was a painstaking process, but I knew that it was essential. The slightest mistake, the smallest inaccuracy, could undermine my entire case and give my father the ammunition he needed to destroy me. To protect myself, I set up a secure email account using a virtual private network, VPN, and an anonymous browser. I learned about digital forensics, how to scrub metadata from files, how to encrypt communications, and how to cover my tracks online. I even purchased a burner phone using cash and a fake name, just in case. I knew that my father was likely monitoring my communications, so I had to be extra careful. I couldn't trust anyone, not even my closest friends. I smiled. I played their game. But I was recording. I decided to contact a well-known investigative journalist, someone with a reputation for exposing corporate greed and corruption. I found a journalist who had written extensively about similar cases in the past. I drafted a carefully worded email outlining the allegations against my father and offering to provide evidence to support my claims. I didn't reveal my identity, just identified myself as a concerned citizen with access to sensitive information. I waited anxiously for a response, checking my email constantly, my heart pounding with anticipation. After a few days, I received a reply. The journalist was interested, but understandably skeptical. He asked for some preliminary evidence to verify my claims. I sent him a few anonymized documents, enough to pique his interest without revealing too much. He reviewed the documents and then agreed to meet with me in person, under the condition of strict confidentiality. The meeting took place in a discreet location, a small out-of-the-way diner on the outskirts of town. I arrived early, dressed in a disguise, my heart racing. The journalist was already there, sitting in a booth in the back, nursing a cup of coffee. He introduced himself, and we got straight to business. I presented him with the full scope of my evidence, explaining the details of my father's misconduct, the victims, the cover-ups, everything. The journalist listened intently, taking notes, asking questions. He was clearly impressed by the depth and breadth of my investigation.
He said he would need time to review the evidence and verify my claims, but he was optimistic that he could publish a story that would expose my father's wrongdoings. I left the meeting feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. I had done everything I could. Now it was up to the journalist to do his job. The next few weeks were a blur of anticipation and paranoia. I continued to work at the coffee shop, trying to maintain a normal routine, but inside I was a nervous wreck. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid that my father would discover what I was doing. I knew that if he found out, he would stop at nothing to silence me. I received a call from the journalist, his voice urgent. He said he had verified my claims, that the evidence was solid, and that he was ready to publish the story. But he also warned me that my father was likely to retaliate, that I needed to be prepared for the fallout. He advised me to go into hiding, to change my name, to disappear completely. I knew he was right, but I couldn't bring myself to run. I had come too far, sacrificed too much. I wanted to see my father face justice, to witness his downfall. I decided to stay and fight. The journalist published the story. It was a bombshell. The article detailed my father's history of misconduct, the lawsuits, the safety violations, the exploitation of workers. It included interviews with victims, leaked documents, and damning evidence of his corruption. The story went viral, spreading like wildfire across social media and news outlets. The public outcry was immediate and overwhelming. Protests erupted outside my father's company headquarters. His business partners distanced themselves from him. His reputation was shattered. My father denied the allegations, calling the story a fabrication, a smear campaign orchestrated by disgruntled employees. But no one believed him. The evidence was too compelling, the accusations too credible. Law enforcement agencies launched investigations into my father's company, focusing on the safety violations and the financial irregularities. His assets were frozen. His empire began to crumble. The exact day they tried to end me, I exposed the truth. The fallout was immediate and devastating. My father was a pariah, his empire crumbling before his eyes. But I knew he wouldn't go down without a fight. He was a master manipulator, a seasoned player in the game of power and influence. He would use every trick in the book to discredit me, to silence me, to protect himself. And he knew exactly where to hit me, where it would hurt the most: my past. He started digging into my personal life, dredging up old mistakes, exaggerating minor indiscretions, twisting the truth to paint me as a damaged, unstable, and vindictive woman. He leaked information to the press about my struggles with anxiety, my failed relationships, my past financial difficulties. He portrayed me as a desperate attention seeker, a liar, a con artist. He even tried to use my history of mental health problems against me, suggesting that I was delusional and unfit to be believed. I watched in horror as my reputation was systematically dismantled, as my credibility was undermined, as my life was dissected and scrutinized by the media and the public. I felt like I was being attacked from all sides, like I was drowning in a sea of lies and accusations. But I refused to be silenced. I knew that the truth was on my side, and I was determined to fight back. I hired a public relations firm to manage the media storm, to counter my father's accusations, and to present my side of the story. I gave interviews, wrote op-eds, and spoke out on social media, defending myself against the attacks and reaffirming my commitment to exposing the truth. I refused to let my father control the narrative, to define me by my past mistakes. I would not be a victim. I would be a survivor. Then came the break I was waiting for. One of my contacts from my deep dives into my father's business dealings reached out. He was a mid-level executive, someone who had seen things he couldn't stomach. He'd been following the news, the investigations, the collapse. Guilt, it seemed, finally outweighed fear. He had information, he said, information that would bury my father for good. He had access to offshore accounts, shell corporations, and a network of secret investments my father had been using to hide his wealth and evade taxes for years. He was willing to hand it all over, but he wanted something in return: immunity from prosecution and a guarantee of protection for himself and his family. I contacted my journalist friend, and he put me in touch with a team of lawyers who specialized in whistleblower cases. They vetted the executive, assessed the value of his information, and negotiated a deal with the authorities. In exchange for his cooperation, the executive would receive immunity from prosecution and be placed in a witness protection program. The deal was struck, and the executive began to provide the lawyers with the documents, the data, and the testimony they needed to build their case. The information was explosive. It revealed a complex web of financial fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering that stretched across multiple countries and involved a network of corrupt officials and complicit institutions. My father's empire wasn't just built on lies. It was built on a foundation of systemic illegality. I knew then that this was the end. He was finished. All I needed was the right moment. The trap was set. Now I just had to lure him in. I decided to reach out to my father directly, to propose a meeting, a reconciliation. I knew he would be suspicious, but I also knew that he was desperate to salvage his reputation and to regain control of the situation. I drafted a carefully worded email expressing my willingness to forgive him, to put the past behind us, and to work together to restore our family's name. I suggested that we meet in person, in a neutral location, to discuss the terms of a potential settlement. I knew that my father would be tempted. He was a narcissist, and he couldn't stand the thought of being rejected or humiliated. He needed to believe that he was still in control, that he could still manipulate me, that he could still win. To my surprise, he agreed to meet. He proposed a location, a secluded cabin in the mountains, far away from the prying eyes of the media. I accepted, but I had my own conditions. I insisted that we meet alone, without lawyers, without assistance, without anyone else present. I wanted it to be just the two of us, face to face, with no distractions. He hesitated, but eventually agreed. I knew he was walking into a trap, but he was too arrogant to see it. He thought he was the hunter, but he was the prey. The day of the meeting arrived. I drove up to the cabin, my heart pounding in my chest. The air was crisp and cold, the sky overcast. The cabin was isolated, surrounded by dense forest, miles away from the nearest town. It was the perfect place for a confrontation. I parked my car and walked up to the front door, taking a deep breath. I knocked, and my father opened the door.
He looked tired, haggard, and defeated. The weight of the world was on his shoulders. He greeted me with a forced smile, trying to project an air of confidence, but I could see the fear in his eyes. We sat down at a table in the living room, facing each other. The silence was thick with tension. He started by apologizing, expressing his regret for the things he had said and done. He tried to convince me that he had only been trying to protect me, to guide me, to make me stronger. I listened patiently, letting him talk, letting him dig his own grave. When he was finished, I calmly presented him with the evidence I had gathered, the documents, the data, the testimonies. I showed him the extent of his financial crimes, his tax evasion, his money laundering. I revealed the names of his accomplices, the details of his secret accounts, the locations of his hidden assets. His face turned pale, his eyes widened in disbelief. He realized that he had been caught, that there was no escape. He tried to deny it, to deflect, to bargain, but it was too late. The truth was out, and it was undeniable. Then I played my final card. I told him about the executive, about his cooperation with the authorities, about the deal he had made. I told him that the authorities were already on their way, that they would be arriving at the cabin within the hour to arrest him. His composure crumbled. He started to panic, to plead, to beg. He offered me money, power, anything I wanted, if I would just help him escape. I laughed in his face. I told him that it was over, that he had lost, that there was nothing he could do to change the outcome. I watched as his world collapsed around him, as his dreams shattered, as his life unraveled. The sound of sirens grew louder in the distance, approaching the cabin. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and despair, his eyes filled with a venomous rage. He lunged at me, grabbing me by the throat, trying to silence me, to end me. But I was ready for him. I had anticipated this moment. I twisted free, sending him stumbling back. "It's over, Dad," I said, my voice cold and devoid of emotion. "Your time is up." Right as the police kicked down the door, he revealed his final card. "She's lying," he roared, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Everything I did for her. This company, the money, it was all for her future. She knew everything. She was a willing participant." His words hung in the air, a desperate attempt to drag me down with him. The police, momentarily stunned, hesitated. My carefully constructed narrative, the years of planning, teetered on the brink of collapse. This was his ultimate gambit, to make me an accomplice, to destroy my credibility completely. But he underestimated one thing. I had anticipated this too. For years, I had compiled evidence, not just of his crimes, but of his attempts to involve me, of my repeated refusals, of my efforts to distance myself from his illicit activities. I had emails, voicemails, even recorded conversations where I explicitly rejected his offers of financial assistance and questioned the legality of his business dealings. I had given everything to my lawyer, with instructions to release it the moment he tried to implicate me. As he screamed his accusations, my lawyer released the files to the journalist and the authorities. Within minutes, excerpts of the recordings and damning emails flooded the internet, proving my innocence beyond any doubt. The public, already outraged by my father's actions, turned on him with renewed fury. His attempt to smear me had backfired spectacularly, solidifying my role as the wronged daughter and sealing his fate. The police, now convinced of his guilt and my innocence, moved in to arrest him. He fought them, thrashing and screaming, but it was no use. They dragged him out of the cabin in handcuffs, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. As they led him away, he locked eyes with me, his gaze filled with pure, unadulterated hatred.
"You'll regret this," he screamed. "You haven't won. This isn't over." I just stared back, my face expressionless. It was over. He just didn't know it yet. The following months were a whirlwind. The investigations into my father's company uncovered a vast network of corruption and illegal activity, leading to the arrests of numerous executives and government officials. His assets were seized, his companies were dissolved, and his reputation was irrevocably ruined. He faced multiple charges of fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering, and was ultimately sentenced to decades in prison. Stripped of his wealth, his power, and his freedom, he was a shell of the man he once was. He lost everything. I visited him once in prison. He sat behind a thick pane of glass, his eyes hollow, his spirit broken.
He didn't rage or deny or accuse. He just stared at the table, defeated. I told him that I didn't hate him, but that I could never forgive him. I told him that I hoped one day he would understand the pain he had caused, not just to me, but to countless others. I told him that I was finally free. I walked away, leaving him alone in his despair. The weight of the past lifted from my shoulders. The nightmares began to fade. The world seemed brighter, more hopeful. I started a foundation to support victims of corporate greed and corruption, using my experience to help others seek justice and find healing. I found peace, not in revenge, but in purpose. They lost everything. I just smiled. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. It's not about savoring someone's downfall. It's about reclaiming your life, about standing up for what's right, even when it's terrifying. It's about ensuring that those who abuse their power are held accountable, not for my personal satisfaction, but to prevent them from harming others. It's a harsh, often ugly process, but sometimes it's the only way to break the cycle of injustice. It demands sacrifice, strategy, and an unwavering commitment to the truth. It forces you to confront your own darkness and emerge stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever before. And in the end, it allows you to find a measure of peace, knowing that you did everything you could to make the world a little bit better. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.